The rain fell like judgment over Frost Manor that gray November morning, each drop hammering against the stained glass windows of the estate's grand chapel, as if nature itself demanded entry to witness what was about to unfold. Inside, beneath crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime, 200 guests sat in orchestrated silence, their black designer suits and dresses creating a sea of expensive mourning that reeked more of obligation than genuine grief. Alexander Frost lay in a casket worth $300,000, his hands folded across his chest, his face peaceful in a way it never was during life. The man who built a $20 billion real estate empire by crushing competitors and buying politicians looked almost innocent in death, almost forgiven. But innocence and Alexander Frost were strangers who never shook hands. In the front row, his children maintained their masks. Marcus Frost, 43, sat with military posture, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. The eldest son, the heir apparent, the one who learned every dirty trick from his father and invented a few of his own. His Italian suit was impeccable, his cufflinks were platinum, and his eyes were calculating even in grief, already measuring the empire he was about to inherit. Beside him, his wife Catherine clutched a handkerchief she hadn't actually cried into, her diamond bracelet catching the light with every performative dab at her dry eyes. Vivian Frost Ashford sat 2 seats down, 38 years old and sculpted by the best surgeons money could buy, though her beauty was the kind that made people uncomfortable rather than enchanted. She stared at her father's casket with an expression that could have been sorrow or satisfaction. It was impossible to tell. Her husband Robert sat beside her, a former senator whose political career ended in scandal that Alexander's money had buried deep. They held hands, but their fingers were loose, touching out of habit rather than affection. The youngest, Daniel Frost, 31, sat at the edge of the row, his leg bouncing with nervous energy that annoyed everyone near him. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, which was probably true. Daniel had always been the disappointment, the one who wanted to paint instead of profit, who asked questions about conscience when he should have been closing deals. Alexander barely tolerated him, and Daniel knew it. Father Michael began the eulogy, his voice practiced and professional, speaking of charity and vision and legacy, all the approved lies that families pay clergy to tell at funerals. He talked about Alexander's donations to hospitals, conveniently forgetting the neighborhoods Alexander demolished to build his towers, the families he evicted in winter, the inspectors he bribed to ignore safety violations that later killed construction workers. The eulogy was a fairy tale, and everyone in the room knew it, but they nodded along because that's what you do when the dead man's net worth had more zeros than most people could count. Marcus felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. Another message from the lawyers, probably. There were so many details to manage, so many assets to secure before anyone else could make a claim. His father's death was inconvenient in its timing. There were 3 major deals in motion, deals that required Alexander's personal touch, his particular brand of intimidation. Marcus would have to fill those shoes quickly, show the vultures circling that the Frost family was still untouchable. He glanced at Vivienne, caught her looking back. They hadn't spoken directly in 6 months, not since the incident with the Thompson Holdings acquisition. She'd gone behind his back, used information he'd gathered to make her own play, cutting him out of a $40 million profit. Alexander had laughed it off, said it showed initiative. Marcus had not forgotten. He never forgot. Vivian read her brother's expression easily. Marcus always telegraphed his resentments like billboards. Let him stew in his anger, she thought. While he was busy being offended, she was busy being rich. She'd already contacted 3 of their father's key associates, already started laying groundwork for her own empire separate from whatever Marcus thought he was inheriting. Their father taught them both to be sharks, then seemed surprised when they circled each other. Daniel just wanted it to be over. The funeral, the family, all of it. He'd spent the last decade trying to extract himself from the Frost legacy, trying to build something clean with his art, something that didn't require crushing people into dust. But Alexander's money had followed him everywhere, like a shadow he couldn't escape, funding galleries that wouldn't have looked at his work otherwise, buying critics who praised paintings they didn't understand. Even Daniel's rebellion was something his father had purchased. Father Michael was winding down, approaching the moment where family members could speak if they wished. Marcus had prepared remarks, 3 minutes of carefully crafted corporate speak dressed up as emotion. Vivian had decided silence was more powerful. Daniel hadn't decided anything, trapped as always between what he should do and what he wanted to do. But before Father Michael could invite them forward, something happened that wasn't in the program. A sound crackled through the chapel's speaker system, a pop of static that made everyone jump, then a click, mechanical and deliberate, then breathing, amplified and unmistakable. Someone's breath caught on an old recording. Then Alexander Frost's voice filled the chapel, strong and clear and unmistakably alive. "If you're hearing this, I'm dead. And you vultures are probably sitting in my chapel right now, pretending to mourn while you calculate your inheritances. I know you, I made you, and I know exactly what you are." The chapel erupted in gasps and whispers, heads swiveling to find the source of the recording. Marcus shot to his feet, his face flushing red. Vivian's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. Daniel felt ice water flood his veins. "Sit down, Marcus," Alexander's recorded voice commanded. And somehow, impossibly, Marcus sat. 20 years of conditioning, of obeying that voice, of fearing it, was stronger than death. "I want to tell you all a story," Alexander's voice continued, each word measured and deliberate. "A story about what it really takes to build an empire. Not the sanitized version Father Michael just fed you, but the truth. The bodies, the broken lives, the crimes that money can bury but cannot erase." Catherine Frost gripped her husband's arm hard enough to bruise. She was realizing, as they all were, that this wasn't a malfunction. This was planned. Alexander had planned this. "Marcus, my firstborn, my perfect student. Should I tell them about the Henderson family? You remember them, don't you? That couple who owned the property we needed for the Atlantic Tower project? They wouldn't sell. They'd lived there 40 years, raised their children there, planned to die there. But we couldn't have that, could we, son?" Marcus felt every eye in the chapel turn toward him. His throat was closing, his mind racing through calculations, through damage control, through denials he could craft. You paid someone to plant drugs in their daughter's car during a traffic stop. 23 years old, full scholarship to medical school, her whole life ahead of her. 5 years in prison on a possession charge that was pure fiction. The parents sold the house to pay for lawyers that couldn't help her because the system was already bought. We got our property. The daughter hanged herself in her cell 18 months into her sentence. Did you ever think about her, Marcus? When you're standing in that tower, looking out over the city you own, does her face ever appear in the glass? The silence in the chapel was absolute. Catherine released Marcus's arm, sliding infinitesimally away from him. Marcus's hands were shaking, actually shaking, something he hadn't experienced since childhood. "And Vivian, my darling daughter, my beautiful monster. Let's talk about the Riverside project, shall we? That community center that burned down so conveniently the week before your development broke ground. 4 people died in that fire. A security guard doing his overnight shift. 2 homeless men who'd been sleeping in the back. And a pregnant woman who'd been there using the bathroom. 5 people if you count the baby." Vivian felt something crack inside her chest. Some careful wall she'd built to keep herself separate from her actions. Her face had gone white, bloodless, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking garish and artificial. "You hired professionals, paid them cash, made sure there was no trail. The fire marshal's report called it electrical failure. The fire marshal got a new boat that summer, didn't he, Vivian? 42 feet. Gorgeous teak deck. I saw the pictures. Did you ever see pictures of what was left of those people after the fire? The pregnant woman's name was Maria Santos. She was 19. She'd been studying to be a teacher." Robert Ashford stood up abruptly, but Vivian grabbed his wrist, yanking him back down with surprising strength. Her eyes were wild, frantic, darting around the chapel looking for exits, for escape, for anything. "But let's not forget the supporting cast," Alexander's voice rolled on, relentless as a glacier, crushing everything in its path. Catherine, did you think I didn't know about the architect who threatened to report the structural violations in the Brighton building? The one who fell from his balcony. Suicide, they said. Funny how his blood alcohol was 3 times the legal limit, when witnesses saw him sober 2 hours before. The bartender who served him those phantom drinks retired to Aruba 6 months later. Your signature was on the wire transfer. Catherine made a sound like a wounded animal, low and desperate. People around her were shifting away, creating distance, everyone suddenly aware they were sitting next to murderers in expensive clothes. Robert, that ethics investigation that would have sent you to prison, the witnesses who suddenly disappeared or recanted their statements, the evidence that mysteriously vanished from secure storage, that was me. I saved you, but we both know you didn't deserve saving. That intern you harassed into a breakdown, the one who tried to expose you, she's still in a psychiatric facility. Her family doesn't visit anymore. They believe she's delusional, that her accusations were fantasies, because we paid her doctors to say so. The recording crackled, a pause that felt like Alexander gathering his breath across the veil of death. And Daniel, my disappointment, my failure. You think you're different. You think your hands are clean because you paint pretty pictures and pretend to have a conscience? Who do you think paid for your lifestyle, Daniel? Who funded those galleries? That apartment in Soho? Your art supplies probably cost more per month than most families earn. You took the money. You always took the money. You're just as complicit, just as guilty. The only difference is you're a coward about it, hiding behind art and pretending morality while you cash the checks written in blood. Daniel was crying now, openly, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Everything his father said was true, and the truth was suffocating him. Here's what you don't know. Alexander's voice shifted, taking on a tone that was almost amused, almost satisfied. I've spent the last 5 years documenting everything, every crime, every bribe, every body. I have files, recordings, photographs, bank statements, witness statements from people I've paid to stay hidden until my death. It's all compiled, it's all ready, and it's all going to the FBI, the State Attorney General, the New York Times, and every major news outlet in the country. 7 days from today, at noon, if nothing prevents it. The chapel had become a tableau of horror, 200 people frozen in various states of shock and disbelief. But here's the interesting part, Alexander continued. And now there was definitely amusement in his dead voice, a dark pleasure that was distinctly his. One of you is going to try to stop it. One of you is already planning how to find these files, how to destroy them, how to silence anyone who might know where they are. One of you is desperate enough, ruthless enough, empty enough to kill for it. Marcus and Vivian looked at each other, really looked, and saw mirrors of themselves, wolves recognizing wolves. So here's my final gift to you, my legacy, my last lesson. The person who deserves to die next is whichever one of you moves first. Whichever one of you proves they learned my lessons best. Whichever one of you shows they're truly my child, willing to do anything, sacrifice anyone, destroy everything to protect themselves. That person is already damned. That person is already dead inside. That person deserves what's coming. Another pause, longer this time. When Alexander's voice returned, it was softer, almost reflective. I built an empire on bones and lies, and I taught you to do the same. I thought I was teaching you strength. I thought I was preparing you for a world that eats the weak. But I was wrong. I was creating monsters. And now, from beyond my grave, I'm going to watch you destroy each other. 'Cause that's what monsters do. That's all they can do. A final click, then silence. For 10 seconds, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. People scrambling for exits, pulling out phones, everyone talking at once, voices rising in panic and confusion. But in the front row, the Frost family sat paralyzed, trapped in the spotlight of their father's final performance. Marcus was the first to recover. Standing slowly, his mind already working through scenarios, through threats and opportunities and survival strategies. He looked at Vivian, and she looked back, and the understanding between them was clear and cold and absolute. They would tear each other apart. They would burn everything down, because that's what their father taught them. That's all they knew. But it was Daniel who spoke first, his voice quiet but carrying in the chaos, his words directed at no one and everyone. He didn't die naturally, did he? Someone killed him before he could release those files himself. Someone in this room murdered our father. The observation landed like a bomb, because Daniel was right. The medical examiner had called it a heart attack. But Alexander was 68, healthy, exercising daily, no history of heart disease. Convenient timing, his death coming just days before his planned revelation. Vivian stood, her face hardening back into the mask she'd worn for years, the crack in her armor sealing over. "Get out," she said to the crowd, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Everyone out, now. This is a private family matter." The people fled, grateful for permission to escape, leaving behind coats and dignity in their haste to distance themselves from the Frosts and their poison. When the chapel was empty except for family, Vivian turned to Marcus. "Where are the files?" "I don't know," Marcus said, but he was lying. They could all see he was lying. He'd already been looking, had probably found something. "We need to work together," Catherine tried, her voice shaking. "If those files go public, we all go to prison. We need to work together?" Vivian laughed, high and brittle. "He literally just played us recordings of our crimes, and you think we can work together? We're all suspects now. We all had motive to kill him. We're all guilty." "So what do we do?" Robert asked, his politician's Polish finally cracking, revealing the frightened man underneath. Daniel stood, wiping his eyes, something new in his expression, something none of them had seen before. Resolve, maybe, or acceptance. "We wait," he said. "We wait and see which one of us Dad was right about, which one of us is desperate enough to become the next body." He walked out then, leaving his family in their chapel full of lies. In the following days, the Frost family would fracture completely. Marcus would hire security, would start searching for the files with increasing desperation. Vivian would reach out to her own contacts, would start preparing offshore accounts and exit strategies. Catherine and Robert would lawyer up, would start pointing fingers at each other. Daniel would disappear into his studio, painting a portrait of his father that looked less like a man and more like a demon. But Alexander's files would never be found, because Alexander had never compiled them. The whole thing was a bluff, a final manipulation, a test to see if his children were truly the monsters he'd made them into. He wanted to watch from hell as they destroyed themselves, chasing ghosts. The truth was simpler and darker. Alexander had died of a heart attack, natural and banal, just like the medical examiner said. But in his last weeks, knowing death was coming, he'd recorded that tape, not because he had evidence, but because he wanted revenge for something none of his children knew about. He wanted revenge for becoming them, for transforming into the monster his empire required, for losing whatever human thing he'd once been. He couldn't forgive himself, so he made sure they'd never forgive each other. 7 days after the funeral at noon, nothing happened. No files appeared. No authorities arrived. The Frost family waited in terror for an exposure that would never come. And in that waiting, in that fear, in that suspicion of each other, Alexander Frost achieved in death what he never could in life. He made them understand what it felt like to be on the receiving end of their cruelty. He made them live in the fear they'd inflicted on others. He made them prisoners of their own guilt. Marcus would eventually have a nervous breakdown, convinced every knock on the door was the FBI. Vivienne would flee to Switzerland, living in paranoid isolation. Catherine would divorce Marcus and disappear into obscurity. Robert's political ambitions would die completely. And Daniel would keep painting, creating darker and darker portraits, trying to capture something he couldn't name, something that looked like redemption, but felt like damnation. The empire would crumble, the buildings would stand, but the family would fall. And maybe that was justice, imperfect and incomplete, but justice nonetheless. Alexander Frost's final act wasn't murder or exposure. It was making his children live with what they'd done, forcing them to see their reflections clearly for the first time, showing them the monsters they'd become. Sometimes the cruelest punishment isn't death or prison. Sometimes it's simply being forced to know yourself. What would you do if you discovered your entire inheritance was built on blood and lies? Could you live with that knowledge, or would it destroy you from within? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're hungry for more stories that peel back the curtain on power, privilege, and the darkness that hides behind mansion walls, subscribe to this channel and hit that like button. These are the stories the wealthy don't want told, the secrets that money tries to bury, the truths that refuse to stay dead. Until the next case.